Hello and welcome to Unbuilt Giants, a series that looks at the development and demise of some of history's most notable and sometimes bizarre skyscraper projects. The Palace of Progress was a bold mid-century proposal to crown New York's Pennsylvania station with a monumental commercial complex that would serve as both a permanent World's Fair and a showcase of American innovation. Conceived in the mid-1950s by real estate magnate William Zeckendorf and backed by the financially struggling Pennsylvania Railroad, the plan envisioned a colossal 50-story structure housing an international merchandise mart, exhibition halls, and modern amenities, all perched above the city's primary rail terminal. Marketed as a symbol of post-war optimism and urban renewal, the Palace of Progress was meant to rebrand the railroad and revitalize the heart of Midtown Manhattan. Yet despite its ambition and theatrical scale, the project was ultimately doomed by prohibitive costs and shifting priorities, never advancing beyond its promotional renderings and press releases. The origins and evolution of Pennsylvania Station in New York City are deeply entwined with the ambitions of the Pennsylvania Railroad, PRR, once one of the most powerful and far-reaching railway enterprises in the United States. At the close of the 19th century, as the nation industrialized rapidly and its cities swelled with population and commerce, the PRR faced a critical and highly visible weakness. It lacked a direct rail connection into the heart of Manhattan. While competitors such as the New York Central Railroad were building increasingly grand terminals like Grand Central Depot, the PRR's western terminus remained across the Hudson River in Jersey City. Passengers were compelled to disembark from their trains and board ferries to cross the river into Manhattan. This final leg of the journey was slow, dependent on weather, and logistically inefficient, an inconvenient barrier that left the PRR trailing behind its rivals in prestige and practicality. Recognizing both the logistical disadvantage and the symbolic void this represented, PRR President Alexander Johnston Cassatt, in collaboration with the equally struggling Long Island Railroad, resolved to change the course of the company's future, and in 1902, after considerable negotiation and political maneuvering, the PRR won approval for a project to build its own train station in Midtown Manhattan, as connected to New Jersey in the west and Long Island in the east by a series of tunnels. Above ground, the station building, as designed by McKim, Mead, and White, would draw heavily from classical antiquity, envisioning a terminal that would not only serve as a transportation hub, but would also act as a civic monument, an architectural embodiment of American confidence and permanence. Construction on the station began soon after, following the PRR's acquisition of an extensive parcel of Midtown Manhattan between 7th and 8th Avenues and 31st and 33rd Streets, and by the time it opened to partial service on the 8th of September 1910 and fully on the 27th of November, Pennsylvania Station had already become an icon of modern urban infrastructure. The final cost of the project, including the station itself and the North and East River tunnels, was $114 million, an extraordinary expenditure that would today amount to several billion dollars. The station's arrival marked a watershed in urban transportation. For the first time, passengers from the west could travel directly into Manhattan by train, while Long Island Railroad passengers could cross beneath the East River without changing modes of transport. The connection was seamless, the experience breathtaking, and the scale unmatched. Almost immediately, the station became a key artery for both commuter and intercity rail, with its vast underground yards, 21 tracks, and 11 platforms handling hundreds of trains daily. For decades, Pennsylvania Station stood as a symbol of American modernity, technical ingenuity, and civic ambition. Presidents, foreign dignitaries, soldiers, commuters, and tourists all passed through its immense concourses. But the momentum would not last. After World War II, the rise of the automobile, the expansion of commercial aviation, and the construction of the interstate highway system fundamentally altered travel in the United States. Rail travel declined dramatically, and by the 1950s, the PRR, like many other rail companies, was struggling to remain solvent. Maintaining the enormous and now underused structure became an increasingly burdensome cost. To the railroad's executives, the once majestic station had become a costly anachronism, out of step with a city embracing steel and glass towers and the efficiencies of the automobile age. In 1954, in a moment that would alter the fate of the building, real estate magnate William Zeckendorf secured an option to develop the station's air rights. In 1955, the Pennsylvania Railroad publicly introduced a strikingly ambitious vision for the future of its flagship property in Midtown Manhattan. This vision took the form of a towering new building, the so-called Palace of Progress, a name intended to evoke national pride and technological optimism in the post-war era. Similarly, the site was also referred to unofficially as the World Trade Center, the first time this name had been coined in a major building project, and one that would later come to define the history of New York's skyline. Conceived as a 50-story skyscraper, the proposed structure was to be erected directly above the existing Pennsylvania station, effectively replacing the historic Beaux-Arts edifice with a gleaming Modernist colossus. The planned building would have fully occupied approximately 8 acres, making it one of the largest redevelopment proposals in New York City at the time. The Palace of Progress was envisioned as a centerpiece of American innovation and global commerce. Within its immense vertical structure, it was to house a permanent World's Fair exhibition space and an international merchandise mart where commercial representatives from around the globe could showcase goods and establish business ties. It was marketed as a monument to American progress and capitalism, projecting an image of confidence, modernity, and limitless economic potential. The project promised to transform Penn Station not just into a transit hub, but into a cultural and commercial destination in its own right, redefining the surrounding neighborhood in the process. Though exact construction specifications were never released, the Palace of Progress was imagined as a vast steel-framed skyscraper clad in modern materials, most likely glass curtain walls and sleek metal facades typical of mid-century corporate architecture. Its design would have stood in stark contrast to the classical grandeur of the original station, replacing the pink granite colonnades and vaulted ceilings with hard-edged efficiency and monumental verticality. The proposed structure was to be managed by Palace of Progress, Inc., a wholly owned corporate subsidiary of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Its public face was showman and impresario Billy Rose, who had been appointed president and general manager. Rose's involvement reflected the project's blend of commercial spectacle and entertainment, suggesting that the building was not only meant to function as a business complex, but to dazzle and attract the public as well. Despite the scale of the proposal and the attention it received, the Palace of Progress was short-lived. By January 1956, Zeckendorf had declared the scheme to be economically impractical. The estimated cost of constructing the necessary foundations to support such a vast structure atop the existing subterranean infrastructure rendered the project infeasible. Instead, Zeckendorf shifted his attention to a more expansive and even bolder redevelopment scheme extending westward toward the Hudson River. This new plan proposed a sprawling urban complex occupying nearly 50 acres and came with a dramatically increased price tag, projected at between $300 and $500 million. The revised proposal included 12 million square feet of commercial and exhibition space, enough to rival the largest developments in the country. Among its signature elements was a 1,750-foot-high observation tower, dubbed the Freedom Tower, that would have eclipsed every other structure on the Manhattan skyline at the time, marketed as the tallest of its kind in the world. In addition to this, the development was to feature an underground parking facility capable of accommodating 20,000 vehicles, a scale of automobile infrastructure then unprecedented in any urban project. A conveyor belt system, similar to that once proposed to replace the Times Square Grand Central subway shuttle, was also included to link the site with nearby transit and railroad connections. However, the estimated cost of the foundations alone for the proposed Palace of Progress reached an astonishing $45 million, an amount that far exceeded original projections and proved fatal to the scheme's viability. Although the structure was imagined as a bold and transformative addition to Midtown Manhattan, combining commercial ambition with architectural spectacle, its physical and financial demands quickly outstripped what its developers could realistically deliver. The vision, pitched with great fanfare by Zeckendorf and backed initially by the Pennsylvania Railroad, ultimately collapsed under its own weight. The sheer complexity of constructing such a monumental edifice atop an active rail terminal, combined with the astronomical expenses involved before a single floor could be built, rendered the project economically untenable. As enthusiasm waned and financial caution took precedence, the dream of a Palace of Progress was quietly shelved. At the same time, the Pennsylvania Railroad was entering a period of accelerating decline. In 1960, a new chapter opened when the Madison Square Garden Corporation, led by Irving Mitchell Felt, unveiled plans for a massive new sports and entertainment complex to be constructed directly above the existing station. This plan offered the railroad financial relief and promised the city a modern arena and commercial development which it eagerly accepted. When the New York Times ran its front-page story on the 25th of July of that year with the headline, "New Madison Square Garden to Rise Atop Penn Station," the article failed even to mention that the historic structure would be razed. The omission was telling. The erasure of Penn Station was already being normalized. Public resistance to the demolition was at first muted. The preservationist movement, still in its infancy, lacked the institutional clout and public support it would later acquire. Still, voices of protest did rise. Architectural critic Ada Louise Huxtable used her platform at the New York Times to sound the alarm. Activists and preservationists, including the newly formed Action Group for Better Architecture in New York, AGBNY, rallied to the station's defense. They organized protests, circulated petitions, and called for adaptive reuse of the building, preserving its majestic spaces while integrating new functions. But their efforts could not overcome the momentum of corporate interests and the city's planning authorities, who prioritized economic development over architectural preservation. In January 1963, the City Planning Commission voted in favor of demolition. On 28th of October that year, the dismantling of Penn Station began. By the end of 1966, the above-ground portions of the station had been completely erased from the cityscape. The Madison Square Garden complex, including its circular sports arena and adjacent office complex, would be opened in February 1968 to widespread condemnation, with particular emphasis being placed on the fact that the once spacious train station, with its natural light, was now reduced to a low-ceiling, congested terminal that likened the modern commuter experience to entering the city like rats, where once people had arrived like royalty. Only the original U.S. General Post Office building would survive in its 1910 ornate guise, and has now been reincorporated into the wider Penn Station as part of the Moynihan Train Hall project, as completed in January 2021. As for Zeckendorf's proposals to build a complex further west towards the Hudson. This would essentially come to pass as the Hudson Yards project, a 28-acre site built atop the 30-track West Side Yard complex and has been developed gradually since 2012 as a multi-use series of skyscrapers ranging in height from the 8-story Shed Arts Center to the 1,296 feet tall 30 Hudson Yards. The entire site is to be completed by 2032 and already has come to redefine the western side of Midtown Manhattan beyond measure, turning what was once empty space above a train yard into a vast new public and corporate amenity. As for the concept of a vast complex of skyscrapers that sought to promote global trade, the World Trade Center project would continue to circulate well into the 1960s before finally being revealed as a 7-building complex in Lower Manhattan on a parcel of land known as Radio Row. Ultimately, this would be torn down and replaced by the gigantic 110-story Twin Towers and their smaller satellite buildings, with the Twin Towers themselves being the tallest buildings in the world upon their dedication in April 1973. The gigantic structures would come to redefine New York's skyline and truly set the direction of the city away from its former stock and trade of being an international harbor and transportation hub, to a home for commerce and financial firms, the playground for multinational corporations and the world's super elite. After the eventual destruction of the original Twin Towers on September 11, 2001, the name Freedom Tower was briefly applied to the pinnacle of the new World Trade Center, though this moniker would not remain formally attached to the new tower, with some factions deeming the application of such a term to be in poor taste. Instead, the formal designation of One World Trade Center would be adopted for the new tower, which stands at an iconic height of 1,776 feet above Lower Manhattan and is surrounded by a new complex of both fully completed and operational towers, a 9/11 museum, and 2 reflection pools on the footprints of the Twin Towers, and several unfinished or proposed structures that have been consistently delayed due to indecision on their final form or function, and uncertainty relating to the collapse of the global economic market following the 2008 recession. The Palace of Progress, grandiose as it was in concept, never materialized. Its failure marked a pivotal shift in how city leaders and private developers approached urban planning. The idea of renewing the station through monumental civic-minded architecture gave way to an approach driven almost entirely by commercial return and expedience. Zeckendorf's elaborate blueprint of glass towers, exhibition halls, and soaring observation decks succumbed not to lack of imagination, but to fiscal reality and shifting cultural values. In its place rose Madison Square Garden, flanked by nondescript office towers, and beneath them a reconfigured Penn Station buried entirely underground. Though functional, the new station was almost universally condemned for its dim, oppressive atmosphere and the absence of any architectural distinction. What had once been a gateway to New York that inspired awe was now described as a passage that evoked dread. Yet, out of this loss came a profound legacy. The destruction of Pennsylvania Station sparked a reckoning. The outrage it provoked, though too late to save the building itself, provided the momentum necessary to institutionalize preservation efforts in New York City. The Landmarks Preservation Commission, established in 1965, was a direct response to the demolition. While the Palace of Progress vanished into the archive of unbuilt dreams, its failure and the bitter aftermath of what replaced it became a rallying cry for a new civic consciousness. The fall of Penn Station helped ensure that other landmarks would not share its fate. In losing one of its greatest architectural icons, New York awakened to the necessity of protecting what remained of its historic urban fabric. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing for more episodes coming soon. See you next time.